Now let's move to the most important scene of the Claire-Steve dynamic.
Till one day strolling in his court, an arrow pierced the kind king's heart. He lost his life and his lady love.
This scene is the most important in Code Veronica. That's why I made it its own chapter. First, Claire sells Steve's transformation more severely in Code Veronica than in Darkside Chronicles. Just look at her body language and vocal tone when she says Steve during this transformation. This means that Steve meant more to Claire in Code Veronica than in Darkside Chronicles. And also, let me bring back an example of horrible execution in this scene. Steve was executed so poorly that people laugh at Steve even in his monster form. I've even seen someone call him the fifth Ninja Turtle. I mean, who drew the concept art of Monster Steve? Peter Griffin?
Am I supposed to draw the penis?
Next, just watch these parts and see if you can spot the difference in the story being told.
Oh, Steve. Steve? 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 No!
Did you get it? If not, then watch it again with attention to Steve and what Claire perceives and how she responds to it.
Oh, Steve. Steve!
Got that? Now watch this.
Steve? 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 Steve!
Here is the difference. In Code Veronica, Claire watches Steve die twice. This is why she stops and says,
Oh, Steve.
Steve appears unconscious and lifeless. And that's why Claire slowly brings herself next to Steve. Or else, if she perceived that Steve was alive, she would have run to Steve, considering he just got hit by a very large tentacle. And here, I think there is some missing dialogue, evidence of Capcom's horrible execution. Here's how I would have put it. Pay attention to the scene and the accompanying text.
Oh, Steve.
You're warm.
Damn it! This blind man is not a soap opera writer. This blind man was a rapper, was a radio co-host, was a blind cricketer, is a jiu-jitsu yellow belt, is partly an aspiring voice actor, but not a romance scene writer. Anyways, compare this to Darkside Chronicles. Claire sees that Steve is still alive and is cringing in pain and moving. And that's why Claire runs all the way to Steve and doesn't stop.
Steve!
So in Darkside Chronicles, Claire sees Steve die only once. Do you still need more proof that Darkside Chronicles told a very different story compared to CVX? I think you do, so here's some more. Look what Steve says in both games.
My brother's come to save us. We're getting out of here.
Your brother kept his promise. I'm sorry, I cannot.
We're gonna get you out of here.
No, I'm not gonna make it. You know that. The virus is in me. There's no turning back.
No.
In DSC, Steve says that the virus is in him, so there's no turning back. Basically saying that he has to die. In CVX, Steve first apologizes to Claire that he couldn't keep his promise to her, just like his brother who kept his promise to Claire. This is why I think Claire gets confused.
What? What are you saying?
Claire probably thought that Steve views Claire as his younger sister, just like Chris did. More about the storytelling implications of this later on in this video. Then Steve basically says he is glad to have met someone as amazing as her before dying. And then this is Code Veronica.
I love you, Claire.
Notice the directing. They placed the love confession at the point where the music mostly went silent. Capcom wanted that line to stand out and to be the most important takeaway of this scene. And as you've seen, in the Japanese version, they subtitled this. Now, compare that to Darkside Chronicles.
Claire. I
Steve?
Not only does Steve not say the whole thing, but Steve says the little that he does so faintly that Capcom didn't even bother subtitling it. What does this tell you? This tells you that Claire in Darkside Chronicles didn't know that Steve had feelings for her because she didn't hear it. This treatment is seen in movies and in television, and this is for the audience members to know something that the people within the scene are not supposed to know. I bring this up because I got into a debate with someone who still believes that in both versions, Claire heard Steve's love confession. Here is undeniable proof that Claire in Darkside Chronicles did not know that Steve loved her. Watch these scenes very carefully.
Steve? 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 No!
Did you spot the difference of what Claire is doing? If you still missed it, here is what was happening. In Code Veronica, watch how long it takes for Claire to even comprehend what just happened.
Steve?
That's just about 10 seconds. Now watch the rest.
Steve? Steve?
That's another 5 seconds. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It took about 10 seconds for Claire to even register what happened. After that, she is in denial, and it took another 5 to 6 seconds for her to begin to accept what just happened. Now, watch this scene in Darkside Chronicles.
Steve? Steve? No!
she accepts that he is dead pretty much right away. This is even more proof that Darkside Chronicles told a different story compared to CVX when it comes to even the Claire Steve dynamic. Furthermore, remember in Code Veronica, I just showed you Claire watches Steve die twice? But it's the second time that she watches him die that mentally breaks her. She responds so severely to the second time that she is shaking him, trying to wake him up. Something that not only does she not do after watching him die the first time, but something she does not do in Darkside Chronicles. Not a soap opera writer. All right? Whatever. Almost as if to say,
Steve? Steve? Steve?
Much better.
Oh, Steve.
Your weapon is inadequate.
Claire thinks my weapon's just fine.
A lie she tells herself.
thanks, Bane. It seems that caffeine rush of coffee and Red Bull gave me a concussion. I can tell, maybe even you have a lot of hatred for Steve.
Hatred gives me strength.
Anyways, this is her responding to Steve's love confession, meaning that she definitely heard it in Code Veronica X. Claire is in denial of his death after watching him die in Code Veronica. In Darkside Chronicles, Claire accepts it immediately and does not show this response, meaning she did not hear Steve's love confession. You want more cheese? And remember, the CVX and Kanzenban updated versions, the ones that keep getting re-released, is the one where Claire retracts her hand with much more of a tragic love story implication. Beyond that, look at the directing. In Darkside Chronicles, the camera zooms out. In Code Veronica, just look at Claire's body language, especially when she has to accept that Steve is dead. Notice at this point, her shoulder somewhat closes in, she tucks her chin in, she somewhat recoils and stiffens her entire body as if something ruptured in her chest, along with a facial expression of sorrow and physical pain. The body language story being told here is that Claire was so shocked by what happened that she actually suffered a mild version of broken heart syndrome, which is a mild version of a heart attack. Compared to this level of storytelling, we get nothing in Darkside Chronicles. It's even down to the crying. Claire doesn't cry nearly as hard in DSC, further indicating that Claire didn't know that Steve loved her. She even gives a bit of a speech of taking revenge.
Steve? Steve! No!
Stay here. I'm gonna go plant this in the power room.
I'm coming with you. It's time this ended. Alexia has to be stopped. I'm gonna finish this, Steve. And then we'll all be free.
In CVX, Claire was crying so hard that she couldn't speak. And when she does speak, just pay very close attention to how Allison Court delivers these lines.
Claire? Is that you, Claire?
Chris?
No! The door won't open. Hey, is Steve with you?
Steve,
Listen, Claire. We have to get out of here immediately. Can you unlock it from the inside?
No, I can't. Chris, there should be a self-destruct system somewhere. If you activate it, all the electronic locks might be deactivated.
Even the last part, when Claire is telling Chris what to do, notice Allison actually decreased her speech rate a little bit, along with delivering that line with a shiver in her voice, an increasing shiver in her voice, it seems.
Chris, there should be a self-destruct system somewhere. If you activate it, all the electronic locks might be deactivated.
The story being told here is that Claire is trying so hard not to cry that she can barely talk, but she has to tell Chris how to unlock the door, or else neither of them escape. Allison delivered this line very well. And I told you people, it seems Allison Court took this role very seriously, as serious as a live action movie. And Resident Evil fans laughed at it. And to end this segment, some people believe that Steve wasn't even supposed to be in this game because he was actually supposed to be Leon. So Steve is not important to Claire. To that, I say, Capcom themselves are telling you that Steve meant everything to Claire. Because all of those 16 Code Veronica references, whenever Claire showed up in the original timeline in future canonical material, has something to do with losing Steve, which elicits involuntary reactions. So all 16 of them cannot be just a coincidence. Because why will Capcom put so many coincidences by design? So wake up, my friend. Claire is definitely going through love PTSD because of losing Steve. But if we're going to use that argument, let's go all the way with it. Did you know that this wasn't even supposed to be Claire Redfield? It was supposed to be Jill Valentine, alongside Chris, Barry, and possibly Leon and Hunk in Code Veronica, especially if you read Jill's diary in Resident Evil 3. Furthermore, did you forget that this wasn't even supposed to be Claire? It was supposed to be Elza Walker, who has nothing to do with the Redfields. And shout out to the YouTuber, Mr. Puss in Boots, for clarifying and later confirming a lot of information about Resident Evil. A lot of which I discovered the hard way, by the way. Did you know that when close to 80% of the Resident Evil 2 game was completed, the original one, let's call it the prototype Resident Evil 2 was thrown out of the window and was heavily revised to give you the current version of Resident Evil 2, and the basic vanilla college girl bike enthusiast girl Elza Walker was changed into Claire Redfield and then given this backstory to connect her with Resident Evil 1. But to the person who came at me with that accusation, you know who you are. So please don't tell me that you are dumb enough to believe that when close to 80% of the game was complete, Capcom took a look at those people and like, wait a minute. I don't think Elza Walker is related to Chris Redfield. They have different surnames. Yeah, I think we should change this Elza Walker's name to something else to connect it to Resident Evil 1. Please don't tell me that Capcom realized this the very last moment. Yes, people, don't be surprised. I am coming across such idiotic arguments. Also, in Resident Evil 2, Capcom established that Ada was alive and Leon had romantic feelings for her. And she did for him too. Why would Capcom sabotage their own storytelling and have Leon die confessing his love for Claire? Furthermore, Capcom already established that Leon is a bit of a playboy, having flings with multiple women, none of whom are Claire, by the way. You wonder why? Capcom are stupid, but they're not that stupid. And while we're at my interaction with Mr. Puss in Boots, I stand corrected. He provided in-game evidence to prove that Resident Evil 3 started off as a side project but later got elevated to main status. The proof he provided is the fact that Resident Evil 3 has very little CG cutscenes compared to Resident Evil 2.